So, if the question is, do we need a national law for ambulance, what is your answer?
Yes.
Yes. My answer is yes, but with a caveat, and that is, any ambulance in isolation can never save lives. And when you create laws, they should be not towards creating ambulances or people, it should be towards saving lives. And we have a great statistics of road traffic accidents and how lives are lost because people don't work in systems, they work in isolation. Road engineering is different, Motor Vehicle Act is different, hospitals are different, ambulance services are different. So the first point is, the answer is yes, but national ambulance law by itself is never going to be adequate. That's my first point that I want to tell. And why I say this? Because any emergency medical service should not be becoming an ambulance transportation company. It is created to reduce the mortality and morbidity in emergency medical conditions. It should never be judged by number of trips that you have made. It should be judged by the accident mortality that you reduced or morbidity that you reduced if it was used for injury or it was for MI or it was for other conditions. You should find out at the end of the day, has it actually impacted. So if I look at the chain of survival, there are different steps. Access to care, transportation, care during that transportation, where they reach at the post, at the end of that transportation, how are they triaged at that point, how are they treated, and then how are they disposed, either in the form of transfer, transportation, or a discharge from that facility. So if I look at this, ambulances form one very small piece of this chain of survival, and therefore it's very essential to learn from what has happened historically in countries where EMS is evolved or emergency medical systems are evolved, that if you keep ambulances in isolation and don't link it up with the hospital-based care system, you will never attain your goals. In our country, there are lots of important challenges, and I just want to share what are the important things. If I look at emergency medical services, how many agencies are involved in this? Broadly, police, fire, emergency medical services, ambulances, the community, the hospitals, the government, the accreditation, regulatory bodies, the law enforcement agencies or the courts, etc. All of these are working. What is the current legal framework that comes into the ambit of addressing the issues which are related to emergency medical care? You have the Motor Vehicles Act, you have the Clinical Establishment Act, you have the NABH standards. Recently they have come up with the Emergency Department standards. You have the NCI, the National Road Guidelines. You have the Supreme Court guidelines of the Good Samaritan law. Recently there is a Law Commission report, 201st Law Commission report, which has looked at comprehensive learning from the other countries on creating Emergency Medical Services Act. Then you have the Gujarat Emergency Medical Services Act, which is state specific, which was created in 2007. These are the current legal framework, and then there are how many institutions working in enforcing this? There is Ministry of Road Transport, Ministry of Health Family, NABH, NCI, Supreme Court, Automobile Industry Standards, who have set up the National Ambulance Code Standards. Then you have the Automobile Industry Standards, there are NGOs, there are EMS agencies. Now, how on earth do you expect that all of them will be thinking with some common goal? They are not bound by the same agency, they are not accountable to the same agency, and therefore you do not see congruence of all of these agencies towards a common goal. Everybody just doing their goal in their part, and the end result is not what we want. So if you look at this, there are too many issues, too many bodies, and too many people trying to address the same issue, but in isolation. It's important for all of them to converge under what is called as emergency medical services system. And these are the scopes of that system which are working towards one common direction and common goal, and there is congruence. Now, a lot of countries when they form EMS-based law, they look up to the great law called EMTALA, which was formed in US. That's not an answer to Indian problem at all. If you look at EMTALA in US, Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, it was largely formed to prevent dumping which was happening for non-insured patients who were not being taken care by hospitals which were not addressing to non-insured patients or private hospitals, and they were all being dumped to the government or public facilities. To prevent that dumping, it's actually also called as the anti-dumping law. They created this so that they can distribute the load of non-insured patients onto the private healthcare system that exists in the United States of America. The law was created, it was reinforced, there was penalty which was imposed, they collected high amounts of penalty in the first 2 years of implementation. But what happened? The result of this was, there was no funding mandated in this. There was no mechanism to implement who bears the cost of that patient who is put in that hospital. If that hospital doesn't get a subsidy to create that hospital infrastructure, who will bear this cost? As a result of which nearly 30% of the emergency departments had to be shut down because they just could not bear the cost of the uninsured care. So, one fundamental thing that is there is when we create EMS law in this country, unless we create a robust funding mechanism for sustenance, it is bound to fail. It's very essential that for Emergency Medical Services Act in this country, we create very robust funding mechanism. And trust me, the cost of running ambulance services just for one state comes to about 200 to 300 crores, and we are seeing this. Probably Maharashtra will be much higher than that per year, and those ambulances need to be replaced every 3 to 5 years, and people also need to be retrained. So there is a huge cost involved into this. So if I look at exactly the same journey was done in the United States, they actually had an EMS Act laid down in 1973, and then they reflected onto this and came back and said there are some important components of emergency medical service system. So when you're talking of the law, these are the points that we need to talk about. What are these important pillars? First one is manpower, second is training, third is communication, transportation, facilities, emergency and critical care units, public safety agencies, consumer participation, access to care, patient transfers, coordinated patient record keeping, public information and education, review and evaluation, disaster planning and mutual aid. But 20 years later they realized that funding was not part of this. It had missed the most important element of funding and how funding will be coming. So then came in 1996, they came up with EMS Agenda for Future, within which they looked at more holistically to create sustainable systems. And one of the important pillars of sustainable systems in emergency care is to make them regionalized. For a square kilometer or for a geography, how to create a tiered structure so that the emergency response can be appropriate at every level. And then they said, these are the 14 important points that you need to keep in mind when you are framing the EMS Act. Integration of healthcare services, that's the point that I mentioned, I made my opening remarks. You can't have ambulances working in isolation. You have to integrate healthcare services. Second is, it should be driven by research. What is the problem? We started emergency services in Hyderabad or Andhra Pradesh, Telangana 6 years ago to address road traffic accidents, and today we are talking about ambulance deliveries being conducted. And the accidents have not reduced, the mortality has not reduced in those states because of road traffic accidents. It should be guided by EMS research. What's your problem? Legislation and regulation should be an important part. System finance should be integrated into it. Human resources, medical direction is key. You'll be surprised that most of the state-run ambulance services do not have an official position of a medical director. It's largely run by people who run logistics business and operations. Medical direction is completely missing. We only look at number of calls and the response time. We do not have the appropriate documentation of what care was done, who had done the care, was there a protocol for it, and what was the outcome of that care. So medical direction is important. So I will summarize into 3 points. Do we need? Yes, but as a part of the comprehensive EMS Act. Funding is the key. You need to have comprehensive EMS systems which are outcome driven and research driven. It should be regionalized, and auditing and accountability of that system is extremely important. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joshi.